really more of a just only cheese pizza kind of girl.
Honestly, simplicity is like the goal. Simple food. Okay, so moving back into more of the political side of things, when did you first get involved in politics and what inspired you to run for Congress in 2018 and then later in 2020?
I always tried to make my decisions based on where I felt like I could have the most impact and where I could work on some of the most challenging problems that affected the most people. And so for a long time, to me, that meant working on the policy side of things, on conflict resolution and stabilization, international development, and serving vulnerable children around the world. And so I worked at the UN in peacekeeping, at UNICEF, and then at the State Department, and then was a policy advisor for Hillary Clinton on the 2016 presidential campaign. After we lost, I ran a nonprofit for a year that was helping to get internet to students around the world, and it was really rewarding and meaningful work. But I actually landed at JFK the day that the Muslim ban was announced, and my youngest sibling is trans, and so a lot of the rhetoric coming out of the White House was affecting my family pretty personally, and I just started to realize that while the work I was doing was important, everything that I cared about was at risk here at home. And that if I really was going to stay true to my values of working on the most important problems that affect the most people right now, I had to come back home and start working on the situation here. So still didn't think that was going to mean running myself. I actually thought I was going to help someone else's campaign. But in the area where I had grown up, there was a race that we could flip from red to blue, and there was no woman running. And after talking to people and many people reaching out and asking me to run, I decided that if I really believed we needed more women and young people in office, that at some point I had to step up and run myself. And so that's what I did in 2018. I got very close but lost. And then thought I was done, was working at the University of San Diego as a scholar in residence in their School of Peace Studies. Started a nonprofit initiative to address childhood poverty in San Diego, and was happy doing that. And then Susan Davis, our long-term Congresswoman, announced her retirement. And after many more phone calls from community members and others, I felt like it was again important for me to step up, because even before everything we're going through right now, I felt like this Congress we're in right now was going to be making really generational decisions that were going to have huge consequences, and that it was important that our generation and that more young people and women had a seat at the table.
Thank you a lot for sharing that. That was really interesting to hear. Moving on to talk a little more about current events, what was your personal experience during the insurrection at the Capitol, and what were your immediate thoughts after? Or what are your thoughts in retrospect?
So I was in the House chamber. I was in the gallery on January 6th. I had been so excited. I was one of the members chosen to sit in the gallery to watch the opening of the proceedings. It was a big honor. But I was there. Well, before we actually could start hearing things ourselves, I was getting text messages from family who was watching CNN. I actually at one point texted my parents, like, don't worry, I'm in the safest place I can be. The House chamber is going to be protected. I was wrong. But I was there. We heard commotion. We heard the gunshots. We had to get the gas masks out from under the seats, hide under the chairs, evacuate. They're not used to having members up in the gallery. We were only there because of COVID and we needed to social distance. So there's no real evacuation route. So we had to climb over chairs and under railings. I had some bruises, and then eventually made it to a couple of different safe rooms until the final secure location. And as soon as I got back to my office later that day, once we got the all clear, I decided it was important to immediately call for impeachment. So we put out a statement that day. And I still believe that was the right thing to do, because my background is actually working in conflict prevention and resolution, working actually on post-coup transitions in a couple of countries around the world. And I know from that experience that actually if you don't have accountability the first time an incident like this happens, you're much more likely to have future instances of violence. And so I felt like it was really important that we set the marker down, that we hold people accountable, anyone who incited, encouraged, or committed acts of violence that day, and that we really set down the marker that we can have political disagreements, but violence is not the way that you adjudicate those political disagreements.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Moving on to the more positive aspects, what is the most rewarding part of your job?
Sure, I'll have a different answer in a little bit because I've only been here for a little over a month. And my first Wednesday was the insurrection. My second Wednesday, we impeached a president. And my third Wednesday, we inaugurated a new one. So it hasn't quite been the normal experience in Congress. I'll say three things are the most rewarding. So the first is that I think from the outside, it seems like Congress is, I don't know, this swampy place, but actually everyone has been so incredibly nice and welcoming. And it really does feel like a family. And maybe it's just because I experienced January 6th together, I'm not sure. But just the really pulling together and everyone checking up on each other and taking care of each other. It's just been a really amazing experience to be a part of that and to feel that camaraderie and sense of community. The second is obviously getting to represent the amazing people of the 53rd Congressional District. My favorite part of the job is just to talk to people and hear their stories and think about what we can do that will make their lives better. I get to do a little bit now because of COVID, but I'm really looking forward to being able to get back out there and talking to folks and meeting with them as soon as it's safe to do so. And then really knowing that after I hear those stories, I can really do something. I can really work to make a big change. And so the work I'm doing with my team right now to try and think through what kinds of legislation we're going to try and introduce, what kinds of amendments we're going to do on different bills, what kinds of huge change we're going to make in the lives of the American people and the lives of my constituents, like that is, it's really rewarding to know that I'm in a position that can do a lot of good.
You've touched on this a little bit before, but can you tell us a little bit about your work in UNICEF and what that experience was generally like, along with like what you did on the job?
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked in the innovation unit at UNICEF, which is this really cool group of people inside of UNICEF that is tasked with thinking about how a big bureaucracy that's been operating for a long time, doing a lot of really hard things, can do them better and more efficiently and more effectively. I learned a lot about how you move bureaucracies. One of the things we were really focused on was how you actually work with the communities themselves, so that it's not just like UNICEF in New York handing down things, but actually really empowering the communities and people who UNICEF was working with to be the decision makers and to be the ones who were empowered and given agency and then given the tools to be able to accomplish things. So I worked on big data. I was the big data lead, and this was right when big data was on the newer side. People were still thinking about what it could be used for. So I wrote the organization's big data strategy and then set up a data team that is still in place and has been doing a lot of work on now on COVID-19, had worked on Ebola and Zika and other issues, looking at mobility data, and then really thinking about how we could work with private companies who wanted to do good and make sure that we were helping them actually do good and do good in the most impactful way, but also how we could partner so that we could better serve vulnerable children around the world. And that was really interesting because you really got to see how different groups of people think about these challenges and how you have to translate these issues into different frames to be able to work across these different groups of people. And I think that's having more people who can kind of work with different groups and be able to translate ideas and concepts across them. I think we need more of those.
Yeah, for sure. Along with that, can you tell us about your experience working with the UN?
Yeah, so in addition to UNICEF, I was at the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations. I was working on electoral violence, actually, on what peacekeeping missions should do when there's an election in their country, aside from the technical electoral assistance that the UN does. So not the ones who are helping the countries with ballot boxes and voting rolls, but like what should the rest of the peacekeeping mission be doing? And we looked at over 60 different case studies to try and pull out best practices of what worked and what didn't work, to try and standardize the way peacekeeping missions engaged on this issue.
Yeah, thank you so much on that. That was so much motivating. So going back and retouching on this subject, why do you think it's important to have young leaders like yourself in the House and other government positions?
Well, I think it's important for a few reasons. One, as I said, we're the ones who are living with the decisions, the consequences of these decisions. We're the ones who are going to have to live with the world that is created by these decisions. And so we should have a seat at the table. We deserve a seat at the table. I think we also bring a different perspective on issues, a different urgency on some, even knowing about some others. I often say, like, I didn't need the Me Too movement to know that sexual harassment in the workplace was a problem. Like, I'm a young woman in the workplace. I've experienced sexual harassment. And I think there are a lot of issues like that where we just come with a different lived experience, and we can make sure that everything is being taken into account when we're making these big decisions, and not just a certain subset of the population's concerns being taken into account.
So we really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with us. Why do you think students should take the time out of their busy schedules to actively engage with the government and learn about it?
Well, because we need you. We are dealing with a huge amount of challenges right now. And truthfully, when you look across history, you've seen that change happens when young people get involved. So we saw that in the civil rights movement, in LGBTQ plus rights movement, and we're seeing it right now on climate change and gun violence and racial justice and so much more. And so things are only going to get better if each of us decide we're going to do the work it takes to make things better. And I just want to say, like, I know it often feels like someone else out there is working on it, or I don't know enough yet. But the fact of the matter is, like, you do know enough, and we need you, and we need your voice now more than ever. And so I hope you get involved. I hope you stay involved. My team will probably hate me, but I hope you call your representatives a lot and keep pushing them to do the right thing. If you're my constituent, call my office. We love hearing from you. And get involved, because, like, things will only get better if you do.